Welcome to the Transition Bridge podcast. This is Debbie Ronka, your host. And today's episode is a transition topic that I have not yet covered. And it is the transition of that season in life where you are getting divorced and you find yourself in this really challenging and difficult time. This episode is not about promoting or encouraging divorce at all, but it's an episode to help those that find themselves right now in a situation where you know that divorce is inevitable. And it's a challenging and painful time. There's a lot of decisions that you need to make. And so I wanted to invite Liz Merrill to come on with us today to share with us the process that she went through. And I know that she is here to help and guide us in so many different things and to answer a lot of questions that you have. You know, most people don't go into marriage thinking that they're going to get divorced. But when a relationship becomes abusive, then it's not a safe place for the spouse or the child anymore. So what do? How do you navigate this painful transition? It's a very confusing time in life. And again, that's why I invited Liz to be with me today. After being in an abusive marriage herself for 20 years, she knew it was time to leave. And from what she's personally experienced from her own contentious divorce, she actually decided to make a huge pivot of a 35-year career that she had. And she left that career to become a divorce mediator and a coach so she can help others avoid the expensive and the unnecessary mistakes that she made in her own divorce by providing the services that she wished she had. Well, Liz, thank you so much for being with me here today on the Transition Bridge podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really happy to talk to you about this subject. It's, of course, near and dear to my heart.
Yes, it's very personal. And I know it's a topic to talk about because it's part of life and it happens and it's painful enough when a marriage breaks up, but then the whole process of divorce just adds to that pain. And so I know you've learned so much yourself that you can share today with the audience, but take us like to what happened. You shared that you had an abusive marriage of 20 years and you had 3 daughters, and one day one of them came up and actually suggested that you get divorced.
Yeah. So that's right. I was married for a pretty long time, and I saw red flags early on, and I just ignored them. I just thought, well, I'm going to love them away. I'm going to work on myself. We will work it through together. This is a man who has all of these wonderful qualities. I love him. He's anyway, he was great. And so I overlooked and I overlooked and I overlooked and I forgave, and it became clear, especially once we had children and they got a little bit older, um, that I wasn't going to be able to change him. I could only change myself. And I didn't want to leave, even though I recognized that my choices basically were to live in this relationship that was not healthy, or for me to do something about it, because he was not going to change. He wasn't able to change. I tried several times broaching the subject with him, and he got very upset and very angry. And then he would get better, and then he would get worse again. But it took my 3 young daughters coming to me together and saying, Mom, we think that you guys should get divorced, and we think he should move out. And yeah, when they said that, it was like a kick in the gut, because I had thought all of this time, I'm doing what you're supposed to do. I'm staying in this marriage. I'm just going to make it work. I'm going to protect my daughters. I'm going to, stick with it, because that's the brave thing to do. And what I realized in that moment was that wasn't the brave thing to do. The brave thing was to do the hard thing that I was scared of. I was scared for myself financially. I was scared emotionally. I was scared of all the things that many people are afraid of when they are facing divorce. And it was a terrible divorce. It took a long time. It was very expensive. The whole process and the divorce professionals that we worked with actually made it worse for our family,
Oh,
certainly in terms of our relationships, our ability to co-parent effectively. Um, and when I got through that whole process and had some chance to breathe and reflect, I realized it didn't have to be that way. It shouldn't have been that way. It was, you know, the way that you think of when you think of divorce. A lot of our ideas and images of divorce are formed around things that we see in the media, in social media groups, on TV, and the way the divorce is portrayed. And
mhm,
um, so a lot of us tend to think, oh, we have to get attorneys, we have to go to court, we have to litigate. It's going to be ugly, it's going to be expensive. That's just the way it has to be if we want to protect ourselves, right?
mhm.
And in some cases, that is certainly true, but in many, many cases, it doesn't have to be that way. And my goal as a professional, as you said, I went through this transition of divorce and decided to make this other big transformation in my life, which was switching my career from being a professional classical musician to being a mediator, so that I can help other people, whether they're in abusive relationships or just are in a marriage that has run its course. And you know, unfortunately, it's time to move on. Most people I know don't want to, you know, wreck their family, wreck their finances, destroy the other person, or be destroyed. They just want what's fair. They just want to get through it. They want a minimum amount of drama, and they want to preserve a co-parenting relationship so that after the divorce, they're able to successfully work together as business partners almost, right? So because they're going to be co-parenting children until they die. And it can really make or break that relationship, that depending on how the divorce goes.
Oh, absolutely. I can just, because if it's so contentious, then it will just continue. It's like the swords are never laid down, the battle continues. So, gosh, well, that had to be incredible when your three daughters came to you, and I just want to bless you, first of all, because you were doing everything that you could to keep it together. And then you just realized, sometimes there's a
Thank you.
quote here that says, "Our soul knows when it's time to close a chapter." And it just seemed like it was time. And
Yeah.
and and so tell
You know,
us. Oh, go ahead. Oh, I thought you
no,
were
no,
going
no,
to share
no, you're good.
something. So your daughters were young and, from what they observed, they even themselves. So I'm sure that gave you the courage to say, yeah, I have to do this now for myself and for my daughters. And
Hmm.
so, part of what you do as a coach and a mediator is you help others, not make the same mistakes or the same have all the expenses. So can you share what are some of the mistakes that you made or other people typically make in a time of a divorce?
Yes, absolutely. I've been doing this now for quite a while, and I've seen and supported many, 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 many couples go through this, and many individuals. The first mistake that I see is people letting their emotions drive their decisions,
Mm,
right?
yeah.
When you are faced with divorce, whether you're the one who's filing or the other party or both of you, it is very, very natural to feel fear. Um, it's almost inevitable because you're changing everything about your life. You're taking away that security that you had in the marriage, financial, emotional, and otherwise. And even if there is some toxicity in the relationship, there's still some level of security. You have a home, you often have a home. Most people who come to me do, and you have, you know how you're paying your bills, you know where your children are living, you know where you get your groceries and how you get your groceries. But when you start talking about divorce and splitting assets, um, you don't know how much you're going to
Exactly.
have when you walk away from the marriage. You don't know where you're going to live. There's a lot of churn in that bottom layer of Maslow's hierarchy of need, right? Where you're living and your safety. So people get escalated, they get really fearful, they get really angry. And when you are in these big emotions, it kind of short circuits your logical brain, right? So you might start making terrible decisions, because you're so angry or scared or in
Mhm.
this trauma state. So one of the first things I do when people come to me is work with them to quell their fears, help them sit back and not rush out and do something rash, right? One of the one of the first things people do is, and everyone tells them to, right? Go lawyer up, go find the biggest,
Right.
meanest attorney you can find. That is not always a great idea. In fact, many times that's a terrible idea because there are many wonderful attorneys out there who are good at what they do, but they're not trained in helping manage conflict, helping manage communication so that it doesn't escalate, right? They don't care if it escalates, it's more money for them,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
Um, and and so that right there is an example of just like running out and doing something before you really know how divorce works, what situation you're in, um, what kind you before you've thought through the whole process. People are scared and they want the safety of a bulldog attorney, because it feels like that's the right thing to do. So helping people manage their emotions is a big part of what I do. Another mistake that I see is people taking advice from people who aren't professionals. I'm in a lot of Facebook groups, a lot of moms groups, and there is a lot of advice out there from people who don't really know what the process is, what the legalities are in their state. And that advice from people who are well intentioned but aren't fully informed can also really damage a person's ability to continue navigating a divorce in a way that's more healthy, that where both parties are going to come out the other end sad, of course, poorer, of course, lonelier probably, but able to move into the next phase of their life without just being completely covered in anger, and fear. So taking advice that, isn't from professionals, making decisions out of fear and anger, those two things cover a lot of ground in terms of common mistakes that people make. The other thing that I want to talk about on this subject is when you go through a divorce, before you start the process, if you have time, talk to professionals and not just an attorney necessarily. Maybe don't go talk to an attorney because a lot of times you go talk to an attorney and they start stoking the fear. If you don't
Right.
find out, he's going to take everything. She's going to start sleeping or, or whatever. But there are workshops all over the country called Second Saturday. They're for women who are going through a divorce. They're educational and they speak to the divorce laws in that state. So that's a really good place to get information. talk to a divorce coach, talk to, you know, let's see, a mediator. I mean, that's a big part of what I do is just advise people when they're thinking about divorce, because the more you know, the less scared you will be, the less prone to bad advice you will be, the less prone to threats you will be. I can't tell you how many times someone says, my husband said that if I do X, this will be the consequence. I'll never see my children again, or whatever. And that will, that fear will drive their decision, um, because they don't know what the laws are in their state, and they're taking what that person says is the gospel. And so the more you know, the more empowered you can be, and the less
Just the fact that you said, the laws of your state, I never even thought about that myself. Each state will have its own laws, so you really can't give blanket advice to people because every state will have their um, own
Mhm,
guidelines and things. So, and you're so right because divorce does bring up a lot of fear. Up to that point, things were predictable. Like you said, you knew your home, there's everything that you knew, and then everything is being turned upside down. So in transition, it's the unknown that
mhm,
brings all of the fear, the insecurity, and it's true. I mean, we can't see what's ahead of us, and so we can start projecting what we think it's going to look like, and it may look different, but we just allow ourselves to experience so much fear and insecurity. And I love
mhm,
how you shared getting information ahead of time.
mhm.
So let me ask you this question. So when people come to you, is it the individual who's coming contemplating divorce, or do you actually see couples? How does that work?
Yeah, both. Um, Sometimes I'll have an individual reach out and say, um, it's time for divorce. We don't want to litigate. We don't want to be represented by attorneys. We don't want to go to court. We just want things to be fair. I hear that phrase all day long, and I totally get it. Unfortunately, divorce never feels fair. Even if you have the most, beautiful divorce possible, it's still not going to feel fair. But I mean, the sentiment, of course, is
Sure.
understood. We want to work together. We want to create our own parenting plan. We want to figure out what we're going to do in the
Mm,
division of our assets and debts together. Um, so in those instances, I just take them from beginning to end through the whole process, and we're working on the parenting plan, the finances, what to do with the house, the settlement agreement at the end, together collaboratively. And we will bring in other professionals as we need them, like a financial advisor, or a mortgage expert, or there are certified divorce real estate experts, because all of these things are, you know tied up together. One
yeah,
decision in one area affects it over here. So if you're working with a neutral third party who's not trying to push any agenda, isn't representing one party or the other, then you can really get creative in what you want to do. And you can craft your own plan rather than having someone else do it for you, like a judge. Um, I also have individuals come to me who say, I'm thinking about filing. He doesn't know about it, or I haven't told her yet. Um, what do I need to know, or how do we go about this? Or I know they're going to be upset, but I'm hoping we can mediate it, because I know that traditional litigation is going to be very expensive. So sometimes then their spouse will come also and talk to me and say, we'll have the same conversation basically, and they may end up as a couple deciding, yes, we want to go forward with this. Or the other party doesn't want to mediate, or doesn't want to mediate with me, or is very high conflict and has already lawyered up. And the individual who reached out to me in the first place is still needing support. And that is where my work as a coach comes in, because even if you had, and this was my experience, I had an attorney and a financial advisor and a realtor, and I still had no idea what I was doing. I was making all kinds of mistakes. I was using my attorney as a sounding board, which was very expensive. I always advise people don't cry in your attorney's office because that's a lot of money. Take it to your therapist. Everybody has their own specialty and use them according to what they are able to do for you. Um, but just having an individual help you navigate the divorce process can help you save money in the long run because you aren't making decisions out of anger and fear. You aren't using your attorney for every single thing. You're working with someone who's able to keep you regulated, help you manage your communication, so that you're not sending off nasty grams that have long-term ripple effects.
Right.
Or, if you're getting them from your spouse, you learn new techniques to respond to them so that you're disengaging from the conflict cycles that have brought you to that point. Um, that was a very long answer to your question.
No, it was filled with fabulous information because it is a process, and I just loved hearing all that, and especially the part where the emotions, they will block our ability to logically think. As our emotions escalate, we're not thinking clearly, and that in itself, to me, is so critical because there are so many decisions to be made, and you want to be making them what's best for your children, what's best for moving forward, instead of the emotions of how can I make you suffer, which
Yes,
I think a lot of divorce comes about how am I going to make you suffer because of
yes,
this divorce instead of how can we do this better moving forward, not being husband and wife, but we still have children. How can we do this better and still be humane, as you had shared some of the things that I read? So,
yeah.
is it actually possible then to avoid going into court?
Yes, yes, absolutely. Very few cases really do need to go to court.
Interesting.
Um, if you have one, at least one, what I call high conflict party, who, and when I say high conflict, what I'm referring to is not necessarily a quote unquote narcissist, because that label has a lot of problems for a
Sure.
lot of reasons, and it's certainly overused. But it is true that narcissism is on the rise in this country, and there are plenty of people out there who have traits of narcissism. But when I talk about a high conflict person, what I'm referring to is someone who maybe has traits of personality disorders, mental illness of some description, and or substance abuse. But overall, it's sort of defined by these patterns of behavior of all or nothing, black or white thinking, or not thinking rules apply to you, right? Or just a total lack of empathy or entitlement, just, feeling like they're entitled to behave, badly or to abuse or denigrate their partner. So when you have one high conflict individual who refuses to accept reality, who views his feelings as facts rather than actually acknowledging facts, when
Mhm.
they're unable to negotiate, when they're unable to follow through on agreements that they've made, then you may probably need to go to court, right?
Right.
Um, and they may drive you to court because a lot of people have this idea that they're going to have their day in court and it's going to look like it does in the movies, and they're going to get to stand up and,
Mhm.
say all kinds of grand sounding things and be vindicated, and the other person is going to be revealed as, the crazy person that they are. But it doesn't play out like that. Almost never. Sometimes people get what they want from going to court, or they get more than what they thought they could get. But 9 times out of 10, the settlement that you could get from going to court is no better than a settlement that you could figure out on your own. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
But again, like I said, that's not always possible. But 9 times out of 10, it is possible to avoid court. And in fact, that should be your goal, because when you go to court, everything is public. Anyone can walk into that courtroom and hear the most intimate details of your marriage. It's completely public. You are asking a judge who has never met you before to not only review all of your documentation, and analyze it, but to apply, the law to it, but also to judge you in the short period of time that you're there, right? Because of course, judges are humans and they only can work with what they have, and then that means the facts and their own feelings. They might not like the look of blonde ladies, or they might be prejudiced against men for some reason. You don't know what they bring, but you're asking them to make lifelong decisions for you and your family. So there's a very big risk involved in going to court.
Because
um,
once that's settled, then it's
mhm,
settled, and that's what you
it's
have to live
settled.
with. Unless you want to
Yeah.
go back to court and fight it again, which all the expenses come in. So what do you do with in a situation like you were talking earlier where someone came to you and wanted the divorce and wanted advice, but then the husband lawyered up? What
Yeah.
does what does that spouse who's not lawyered up do then?
So it depends. That's a very lawyerly answer. I have friends who are lawyers and they say that all the time. Because it's true and it's not helpful, but it's true. But it does depend on the situation. Um, when somebody does lawyer up, the other party immediately feels triggered, immediately feels scared, immediately feels
Sure.
exposed and vulnerable, right? So if I am able to talk to the person who's lawyered up and get a sense of why they've done that, that can help me help both of them if they want me to. If that person has like specifically gone after the meanest, you know, attorney with the best reputation for being a bulldog, then the chances that they're able to or willing to negotiate in a more neutral setting is slim. But if they've lawyered up because they wanted to talk to a lawyer to learn about what their rights and obligations are, to have somebody on the sidelines making sure they don't make massive mistakes, or just to have somebody there just in case things go south, that's a different kind of lawyering up. Do you know what I mean? Um, a lot of there are a lot of different ways you can use legal services. Um, you can do it, where you have an attorney, they do everything for you, you don't do anything by yourself, and you just sit back and let them take the driver's seat and hope that you don't end up with a $90,000 bill at the end, right? Or you can hire attorneys um, in unbundled services, or you pay them by the hour, not to represent you, but to give you legal advice, right? To say, oh, that's a good deal, you should take that, or you're not going to get that, even though you think that's what you should get. And give you a reality check and give you advice on how to negotiate. Um, but back to your original question, if someone comes to me and says, I want to have it this way, but he's already lawyered up. Um, I keep coming back to the it depends question. I might advise her to also go find legal counsel. When I do that, I also want to coach them on what kind of attorney will work for them,
That
because
makes
there's
sense.
many different kinds of attorneys as there are people. And there are some that are bulldogs. There are some who are very ethical and really just want to um, help you get through it with the least amount of trauma, right? So one of the things that that I offer anybody are handouts on what to ask yourself
Oh, that's good.
before you go talk to attorneys, and then what kinds of questions do you want to ask attorneys, so that you are able to get a sense of how they're going to represent you, how they're going to bill you, how they're going to communicate with you, what their experience is in X, Y, or Z, or what their outlook is, or how long there are a whole bunch of different kinds of questions that you can ask. And anytime you go talk to an attorney, you want to be as well prepared as possible, right? You want to have your questions in hand because you want to use their time efficiently and use your money efficiently. So,
I mean, that's great. I mean, when you go to see a medical doctor after a diagnosis, the same thing, right? You want to be prepared with questions because we just don't want to walk out with what they say. We kind of want to go
mhm.
a little deeper and get more information. Yeah, I love that you have that handout. In fact, do you have workshops that you do?
I I do workshops periodically. I'm I have a monthly meetup group that I run, which is sort of a hybrid of divorce support and divorce education.
Okay.
And so I do that, and I have different divorce professionals come every month to, lend their expertise. And sometimes I do workshops. I haven't done one in a while. Well, I did one recently about mediation, preparing for mediation. And this is like veering out of my role as a mediator and coaching into as an entrepreneur, but I'm in the process of trying to figure out how to set up a learning management system so that people can go get a download something about how to prepare for mediation, or how to document if you're in an abusive relationship, because that's really critical.
Yeah.
um, yeah, or just divorce 101 basics, those kinds of things. Because again, I really, really believe that if people had more accurate knowledge, it would make a huge difference in the way that they feel about divorce, the way they approach it,
Yeah.
um, the decisions that they make. So yeah.
It's so multifaceted.
Yeah,
I mean, even just the last thing that you shared about documenting how to document ab the abuse is so critical to know because we
right.
go into this, we're first of all, we're blindsided sometimes when someone wants to have a divorce, and there's so much to like you just feel like you're grasping air. Like, what do
Yeah.
I do next? And to be able to find someone like you that actually has a process, understands it because you've been through it yourself. You've created something that really helps people find the accurate and critical information. So this is one thing not everybody wants in life. You don't go into marriage thinking you're going to get divorced, but if it happens, how can I do it well? How can I do it in a healthy way? How can I do it to protect my children? How can I
Mm.
do this to protect my finances, the home? There's so much into it where I can see where you're helping people approach this difficult situation in a healthy way, uh,
Yeah.
healthier way
Yeah.
than had they done it on their own. So, like and I guess my brain's just thinking. So, if you're working with someone and you're done the mediating and you kind of came up with your own plan, then they need to you find some kind of an attorney that will document all this and legalize it. Is that the final step?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
The vast majority of divorces, at least in Colorado, are what's called pro se, which is just another word of saying DIY. People will do it themselves because they can't afford to hire people to do it, or because they think this is, we don't need people to help us. Um, And because of that, there there there's a lot of latitude in terms of what the court will accept in terms of documentation. Um, because people turn in handwritten court forms every day that are barely legible that courts will accept. Because the fact of the matter is, if you stay within the laws and the framework and the guidelines that the court sets out for your divorce, and in Colorado, there are a few big major things that the court will be looking at. It's an equitable state, which means that there's an expectation that you're going to divide your assets equitably and your debt equitably. But within that framework, there's a million different ways you can divide a pie, right?
Right.
So, so back to your question, when I'm mediating with parties, we do all of that together. We do all of the form filling out, all the writing of the MOUs, and
What's an MOU?
oh, sorry, it's a memorandum of understanding.
Okay.
Or could be called a stipulation. There are court forms that you absolutely have to fill out, right? But a lot of times there's not enough room on those forms to include everything that you want to go into a court order, especially for a parenting plan, right? The parenting plan that we have here is 7 pages long or something, but it's very dry. Like, what are you going to do at Christmas time? What time do you pick up the kids? What time do they pick? Those kinds of like granular details, but they don't go into, for example, like, when are we going to let them have social media? When are we going to let them have phones? How are we going to protect them digitally, right?
Mm.
Or what are we going to do if one of us meets a new partner? How are we going to introduce them to the children? And I really encourage co-parents as they're navigating divorce and thinking about a parenting plan to think of as many details as possible, right? And they may go in the parenting plan or they may not, but certainly thinking through, and this is again where it helps to talk to a professional, right? Because we've seen millions of different versions of parenting plans, and some of them are awesome, and you can take and pick and choose,
Mhm.
and include whatever you want, whatever is important to your family in that parenting plan, in a additional, addendum or an MOU, right? So again, as long as it fits within the framework that the court set out, and it's in the best interest of the children, that's one of the most important things that the court looks at, then the court will sign off on a lot of different things.
Okay, so there is an accountability then to the court ultimately. It's not,
Oh, yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
that's what I was wondering, where's the legality part after everybody agrees in mediation? So there is accountability, so that can give you a measure of peace and rest that two
Yeah.
individuals are still being held accountable to follow something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do people come back to you maybe 5 years later and say, we maybe need to change this parenting plan or maybe
Um,
need to make
I
adjustments?
I have had people, yes, do that. Because, if you're divorcing and your children are little, what's appropriate for a 3 and a 5-year-old in a parenting plan
Mhm.
is not necessarily and probably not going to be appropriate when they're, you know,
Teenagers.
11 or whatever. So their needs are going to change per their development and their personalities and their life experiences, and your needs and life situation is going to change as well, right? You might get a full-time job once they've gone to school, and more you need dad to take more parenting time,
Mhm.
right? And the
There's a lot of
children are older and
adaptability.
they're more able to spend time away from mom so that dad can, so there's always going to be churn in a parenting plan, and you can, if you've walked out of your divorce with your head held high with a divorce story, that you feel comfortable telling, that you don't feel shamed by or embarrassed by. Do you know what I mean? That means that
Um,
you are going to be able to have these conversations on a regular basis with your co-parent and make changes as you go along. You can do that for as long as you want, or you can also like craft an entirely new parenting plan, and submit it to the court, um, to turn it into a court order, right?
ooh, I love that. Yeah.
Certainly,
'Cause as
yeah.
you're, yeah,
So,
again, different seasons. Your children are getting older when they're in their teenage years. When do we want to give them a car? When are we going to, the phone, the social media? Yeah. So that's just music to my ears to know that there is that flexibility, that's not set in stone, that you have to grow within this. And
mhm,
addressing the shame part, to be able to say, no, unfortunately, my marriage didn't work, but we have found a way to do our parenting, parent our children, and we're doing it in a healthy way. That's a powerful statement.
mm,
And I wish we could hear more of that, because for the
yeah,
sake of the children and their future, because children are the ones that do carry that brunt if it's not done well,
yeah.
um, as they grow up. Well, gosh, Liz, you have been such an incredible guest. You've shared so much valuable information. And in closing, I just want to give you the final moment here. If there's something that you want to share with someone who's right now contemplating this, or maybe needs some advice or hope, well, what
Mm.
would you share with them?
Oh, so many things come to mind. One of the most, I think, important messages is don't go through it alone.
Mm,
You don't have to do it alone. Um, there are support networks out there. Um, there's spiritual and emotional support networks out there. Um, gather your friends and your family, be truthful with them. And in addition to that, get good professional advice from legitimate sources, whether it's a Second Saturday workshop or some other kind of workshop, or talking to a local divorce professional, um, calling me. I give free consults all day long because I want people to have the information, right? It's a very, very, very painful decision to make or to have thrust upon you. And you're going to go through the 5 stages of grief. And it is a process. It's a transition. And you have the chance to define what kind of divorce you want to have. Whether the other party does not want to have that or not, you can decide how you want to show up, right? And if you have children, they will know that. And it's not easy, and nobody's meant to do it alone, right? Um, doing it in isolation can be dangerous, right? In a lot of ways. So that would be one of my big pieces of information, is or pieces of advice, is just don't do it alone.
that's so important in the community. And well, so
Yeah.
beautifully shared, Liz. Thank you. And I will
Yeah.
have Liz's contact information, her website, and everything, even the link to her meetups in my show notes. But if you can just verbally just say what your website is,
Mhm.
um,
Yeah.
so people
The
can connect
name,
with you.
yeah, the name of my company is Open Space Mediation. And so my website is just openspacemediation.com. And on there, I mean, there's a ton of information on there. There's a link to my calendar, there's my contact information, there's um, things I've written, other podcasts and videos that I've made, and also links to my social media accounts. So
Wonderful. Well, Liz, thank you for being with us here today. And I want to thank all of you as my transition tribe. I know you come in each and every week to learn and to grow. And I just want to speak to you if you are in this situation. I do hope and pray that you reach out to Liz. This is someone that you can trust. This is someone who will embrace where you're at and give you some healthy guidance in a very painful transition of divorce. And that's why I love to have people like Liz come on the podcast, because we need good advice. We need someone coming from a healthy space to give us the advice that we need for our future, for our hope, and for our children. And so thank you, Transition Tribe, because I know today we've embraced, we've grown, and we're going to be transformed by the purpose and power of transitions in our life.